And welcome back to Coaching the Bible. This is episode 250, season 5, episode 37. I hope you are doing well. I hope you had a wonderful and glorious week. If you're watching the video, I apologize for the bearded nature of my face. It ages me dramatically, but it's simply just the reality of life. But if you're looking at the thumbnail that I put together, I feel like I look pretty good in that one. But anyway, this is episode 250. Every week I mention the number of the episode simply just to build on the previous week, and I'm not always celebrating anything in particular, but certain numbers feel like milestones. And so it is that 250 feels like some sort of a milestone in the same way that 100 did and 150 did and 200 did. So over 250 weeks we have been together. That's 250 of 252 weeks. We missed 2 weeks in all that time, one for my daughter's wedding and one because I was on a vacation. And I want to take a moment to appreciate that accomplishment and to thank everyone who's been along for that ride once, twice, 50 times, 100 times, every week. I have no idea. I'm greatly appreciative, and I do not take for granted your participation and your being here every week to be the audience for this, because I never assumed that there actually would be any sort of an audience. It's the messages, the shared reflections, the friends reaching out with a thought, with a, that was great, this one I didn't love. That's fuel. And you've helped me build this into something that I'm exceptionally proud of and trying to figure out exactly what to do with what it is. But 250 weeks, in terms of a consistency level, for me feels very gratifying in the sense of showing up every week. Good or bad, prepared hard in advance, prepared less hard in advance in the sense that I didn't get to it early enough in the week, or I spent a very late Thursday night putting it together, or spent a lot of time on a long Friday putting it together. Sometimes when I'm up, sometimes when I'm down, sometimes when I'm happy, sometimes when I'm not so happy, with the same real core goal, which was to find something meaningful in the text and to turn that meaningful thing into something helpful for our own lives. In the spaces and in the places where we lead, whether we're leading others or whether we're simply leading ourselves, that's what this has been about the entire time. I feel like this week's subject actually reflects on some level what it is that I've been trying to do. Admittedly, a couple of companies, obviously this is their business, reached out to try to have me grow the audience for this, to spend money on this, to try to become something much bigger with this. And I refused because it really wasn't the intent. The idea here was to initially force myself each week to sit down and study and to learn new things, to read new books, to explore, to prepare content that made sense on a weekly basis in an area, in a space, in a topic that was interesting and meaningful, mostly to me, hopefully meaningful to others as well. And so that consistency, that level of accountability to myself and to what it is that I'm trying to do is very meaningful. And 250 is a lot. It's a lot of episodes. It's a lot of subjects. It's a lot of books. It's a lot of quotes. It's a lot of examples. It's a lot of everything. And so thank you to you who listen. Thank you to my family, to my wife, Naomi, to my kids who suffer through this with me every week in terms of production, but also are a cheering audience for it. And thank you to all of you out there who have listened, again, 1 time, 10 times, 100 times, 250 times. So thank you so much. Episode 250 this week, the subject is on leading when there is no applause. Let's open with a question. What would you do if no one knew what you did? It seems like an enigmatic question, but on the negative side of that, you're driving down the highway. I might have used this before here in Coaching the Bible, but I definitely remember using it in a sermon a million years ago. You're driving down the highway. It's late at night. You get to a red light on that road. There is nobody around for miles. Do you stop and wait for the red light to turn green? Do you look both ways and then, sneak across the line and go through the light because nobody's watching anyway? That's something that you might do when no one else is looking. Certainly no one's applauding in that, but let's take the other side of that. There's something going on in your office, on your team, in your company, in your community. Maybe a good example. Let's say the local school board is debating allowing certain kind of content into the classroom that then your children would be studying. And you find that offensive, you find that incongruent, you find that difficult for your value system. And you go to that board meeting and you stand up. There might be applause, there might not be applause. There might be people who agree with you, there might not be people who agree with you. Or there's a protest going on dealing with an issue that is in the press or a big deal right now. Certainly any of the protests relating to Israel versus Hamas, Israel versus Iran, anti-Semitism, genocide, colonialism, all that other stuff. And you're that one guy, one person who shows up with a flag that represents the opposition. A lot of things could happen. Will you speak up? Will you say something? Will you be that person? Will you take action? Will you step forward? Will you not? And so this week we meet two stories that don't obviously go together, but ultimately when we go one layer deeper or two layers deeper, which is what we do here a lot of the time in coaching the Bible, we might reveal a very fundamental and similar core leadership truth. One side of that story is a spear-wielding zealot whose bold act of justice earns divine blessing. That would be the story of Phineas in English, Pinchas in Hebrew. We're going to use the Hebrew. Sorry to all of you out there. The other side is five sisters, the daughters of a gentleman by the name of Zelophehad. There's no translation for that name, who quietly and clearly and courageously ask for something they are not sure they will get. And so they're very different. And yet, at the core, fundamentally, they're very much the same. So let's dive in. Number one, the zealot. Pinchas acts without asking. What does Pinchas see? He sees a desecration going on. The end of last week's portion, going into this week's portion, the story of the people's infidelity with the women of Midian, in particular the leader of the tribe of Simon, doing an act in public. Phineas takes a sword, takes a spear. He acts swiftly, violently, and decisively. The result, 2 people are dead. The larger result, many lives actually are saved from the impending wrath that is to come. That wrath ultimately is averted. The longer term result is a reward of peace, a blessing of peace upon the head of Pinchas. But here's the important part about this that's been repeated over the course of many, many centuries, but worth repeating here, and part of this fundamental lesson. Pinchas acts not for the prize. He has no idea there's going to be a reward or some sort of a blessing afterward. There's no guarantee of anything. Minimally, one might assume that there'd be some sort of retaliation or some sort of fight in return for what he had done to the leader of the tribe. He's not promised a reward. He's not even assured vindication for his act. He could be punished for what he does. He acts without permission and he acts alone. But most fundamentally, he acts because of something and not for something. That's side one. Key leadership principle here that comes out of this story is leadership sometimes demands action that is lonely, that is risky, and that is highly unpopular, and where the outcome may in fact be unclear. And even in those moments, you still have to act, you still have to step in, step up, and do something. Side two is the daughters of Zelophehad speaking up. You want to call them petitioners, call them what you will. What do they see? They see something that appears to be an injustice, an unfairness to their family. And it has to do in a very legal manner in the laws of inheritance, and the likelihood that because their father simply didn't have a son, that their inheritance would leave the family, and it would go to the wider tribe. Why should they be any less? Why shouldn't the daughters inherit? And so what do? They come forward and they ask the question of Moses. They ask not in anger, they ask not in protest, they ask in very courageous but simple, respectful clarity. Why should our father's name be erased from his clan just because he had no sons? Now, in the modern world, that sounds like a very silly question. Of course they're going to inherit. But back in the day, in biblical times, that was not obvious. And that was certainly not a given. And so what do they want? They want justice for their family. They want inheritors' rights for the daughters. And what is the result? Not a given. The inheritance laws change, and now they, the daughters, and then really future daughters, will inherit their father. What's important here to remember about them, there's no crowd behind them. There's no giant protest following them. There's no guarantees of anything. They're simply just asking a question. But they're doing it respectfully, bravely, and it's coming from their values, from their principles. And so the second key leadership point, if Pinchas is one, here's a second. Leadership is sometimes voiced in private rooms through calm and respectful courage with the strength to ask for what hasn't yet been imagined. There's no guarantees as to what the result would be. It could be that Moses adjudicates and says no, or that he turns to God and God says no. But there's no way of knowing that until the question is asked. They ask a question that has actually been asked before, that we talked about in the prior year of Coaching the Bible, which is the idea of the story of the innovation of the second Passover, when the people were impure or couldn't bring the sacrificial lamb, as it were. They asked, why should we be any less? The answer would be obvious, because you are less, you are impure. Sorry. And here, why should we be any less? Why should our families suffer? Why should we not follow or have the same rules applied to us simply because of some sort of a genetic issue or a gender issue? It's not a given, but the question has to be asked. And there's a manner in which that question has to be asked, because when you question the tide, it's a revolution. That revolution could look like Korach, or that revolution could look like the daughters of Zelophehad. That whole concept is a different episode. But what connects the two stories of Phineas and the daughters? On the surface, nothing. One is quite violent, the other quite diplomatic. One is acting on behalf of the entirety of the family, the entirety of the nation, The second is simply focused on the family. Pinchas is acting from moral intensity. His reward is unexpected. He never seeks it. His leadership is reactive and decisive. The daughters act from a question of legal clarity, but from quiet courage. Their request is bold, but respectful. Their leadership is proactive, and it's measured. But when you go down deep and you really get into the heart and the depth of what's going on here in these situations of leadership, because both cases are leadership, you get this. Both demonstrate acting without attachment to outcome. Both lead with clarity, not with any intent or regard for the compensation or the reward. Both take initiative that is rooted in conviction, not in ego, not in applause, not in reward. And so the connective tissue between the two is that people lead from values and they don't lead from validation. And whether you act with fire or with finesse, the leadership that lasts, the leadership that we learn about, the leadership that we talk about, is the leadership that comes from within. That is not to say that we're advocating for people to be like Pinchas and pick up a spear and do what he did. But we are focusing on the deeper idea as to what he, ultimately is about. The quiet conviction, or in his case, the not so quiet conviction. It's not a show, it's not fake, it's not farce. It's not meant to appease or to conform to what is quote unquote right or quote unquote wrong for other people. There's a great quote from Viktor Frankl, from obviously the same place a lot of the other quotes from him are from, Man's Search for Meaning. Don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you're going to miss it. Success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue as the unintended side effect of one's dedication to a cause greater than oneself. So what does that look like today? That looks like the whistleblower who risks, in many cases, more than just career to tell the truth, not knowing if they're going to be believed, not knowing if there's going to be any impact, certainly not knowing if there's anything that's going to come on the other side of that, reward, what have you. That's the quiet employee who points out some sort of inequity in the system at the company. That's a parent or an educator who model a certain level of values without recognition. That's just how they are. That's just how they behave. That is how they act. And in so doing, they shape future generations. It's that parent that shows up, as I mentioned, at the local school board meeting and speaks their mind on an issue that faces them or that bothers them, and really other people as well, but no one's saying anything, and then there's no necessary reality, perhaps, of the reward that's going to ensue. Or the politician who stands against his own party or her own party, because they're standing for something that's right, even if there are consequences there, even if no one on their side will applaud what it is that they're doing and what they're saying. If you want to get Talmudic about it, in the Ethics of the Fathers, the second chapter, there's a very famous statement, you know it. In a place where there is no person, strive to be a person. The Hebrew uses the term ish, which indicates in translation as man. It doesn't simply mean man versus woman, it simply just means human. In a place where there is no human, where no one stands up, where no one steps forward, where no one says what needs to be said, be that person. But you cannot be that person because of some external reward or expectation or fitting in or belonging to something that doesn't work. This is a space of intrinsic, internal integrity and value. The psychology behind it, I think, is mostly obvious, but it's important to share. Number one comes from self-determination theory, which we've mentioned a couple times, certainly of late, from DC and Ryan, which is the following. People are most fulfilled and most effective when they act from intrinsic motivation, purpose, growth, value, rather than extrinsic praise, power, and reward. Why? Because their motivation isn't dependent on public opinion, reward, or recognition. It's either right or it's not. That person is psychologically resilient, and as a result, they're able to stand and do what needs to be done in spaces and places when others will not do it. In our stories, Pinchas and the sisters model this. They move and act because of values, not vanity. I imagine if Pinchas asked anybody, they would have told him, you are out of your mind to go pick up a spear and do what you're about to do. If the daughters would have asked their neighbors or their friends or their cousins or their relatives or somebody else, they would have said, what are you doing? There's no chance this is going to work. But that intrinsic psychological resilience that comes from values and not from external opinion is a driver that allows somebody to step up in those moments. As we said, Pinchas acts without the idea of reward. The daughters pursue the justice with conviction, not to make a name for themselves. They certainly didn't know that they were going to be written down for all time, but to ensure the fairness for generations. And those leaders don't burn out because they're lit up from within. It's such a great. Number two comes from Adam Grant. We're talking about why this is. Adam Grant in Give and Take. Givers who succeed don't sacrifice themselves. They act from alignment and not from expectation. And when you're aligned, when this fits how you see yourself, this comes from within the tree and the train of who you are as a human being, it's much easier to do. And as a result, you're building something that multiplies the values over the course of time. Each time that you work on that, each time that you hit that in yourself, you make it stronger. Pinchas doesn't act to be a hero. He's acting to restore the order and sanctity of the community. The sisters didn't argue for applause. They made space for every daughter that was to come after them. In the end, they're both rewarded, but the rewards, as we said, come after and not because. They didn't act because of the reward. They acted because of the cause. The best leaders ultimately then are not reward driven. They are reality driven. They are intrinsically driven. They are right driven. They're acting, as the title stated, without applause. They don't seek it and they don't need it, and it solely and completely comes from within. The intrinsically led leader is a powerful leader. The last point I'll make on this in terms of understanding why this is the case and why we need to work on this as leaders is when your leadership is intrinsic, you spend less time calculating the optics and more time doing the right thing. This comes from Authentic Leadership by Bill George. People trust leaders who are true to themselves, not those who bend to please others. It's this whole conversation that comes up around populists, people switching sides and in a flash switching their opinions, who ultimately fade out because people don't trust or buy anything that they have to say because they have their finger to the wind, listening to where the polls are and changing their opinions, rather than sticking to who they are, what they actually firmly believe, whether other people like it or not, as a result of which their authenticity comes out, their legitimacy comes out, their intrinsic values stand forward, and you can agree or disagree, like it or not like it. But as a result, those people are focused on action and not calculating the wins and calculating the optics. In practice, for Pinchas, this was risking the backlash by acting with such zeal, but he was aligned with himself. That internal congruence for him earns him ultimately the covenant of peace. Now, if he doesn't act, does he get the covenant of peace? No, but he does act, and that's the result. The sisters themselves, same thing, could have accepted the law as it stood, but instead respectfully, appropriately challenged it, not to rebel, but to live their truth, their inner truth. To not ask for them would have been impossible to live with over the course of time. And that congruence, both for Pinchas and the daughters, makes their leadership clean, trusted, and transformed. As a result, for you, leader, instead of worrying about what people today think about, which is image management, their likes, and their performance metrics, allow this to help you act from alignment within the space of your mission. Speak up when something is wrong, even without the guarantee of the applause or the reward. And then the ability to then build something incredibly meaningful, regardless of press and publicity. But you have to ask yourself the questions of, where am I waiting for applause rather than acting on conviction? For all of us, there are things that's the case, where there are things that are bothering us, things that are going on, and we fluff it off. We don't say what we want to say. We don't step up. We don't stand up. We don't say something. We don't do something. All of us. And what happens for us inside is that we feel very much in those spaces, in those moments, the most inauthentic that we could be. And then you look and you see somebody else who is living in that space, again, not for accolades and applause, but because it's right. If it's an applause, maybe not so much. But if it's for what's right and they're standing up and they're taking the lumps because of it, is something that's laudatory, something that is praiseworthy about that. And so ask yourself about those things. Where am I acting X versus Y? Where am I acting with conviction and not with conviction? Where am I acting because I want to fit in rather than because I want to feel belong to myself? And then the question you want to ask is, what do I do about it? Well, that's always the case here with Coaching the Bible. We're not going to just talk about the idea without giving some sort of a practical. But I would recommend the following 3 things this week. And try to cover them quickly because we're long on time. I'm trying to cut it shorter because people have been telling me, dude, it's a little long. So I apologize for that. But we had a little bit of a preamble this week. Here's number 1 in the practical tools. Run what I call the no one's watching test. Consider something that you've recently done that others know about. And ask yourself the following question as a test. If no one ever found out about it, would I still have taken action? So that might be standing up in a meeting. That might be doing something in the community. Would you still do it if nobody knows about it? Yeah, sometimes it's the case that we do things because it's, it's what other people are doing, or it's not the right reasons, but we do it anyway. And that sometimes is enough. It drives over the course of time towards the right intention, let's say. At the core, why are we doing what we're doing? What about if nobody was watching? Number 2, try to build what I'll call the no applause loop, or the inner scoreboard of no applause. Track your actions over the course of a day or over a week. See how much of that was for integrity or applause. Why did I say that? Why did I do that? Why did I post that? Why didn't I post that? Am I doing it for the achievement or for the alignment? And when you start to notice what's going on for yourself, whether it was rightness or recognition, behavior starts to change. When you start to lean into the space where suddenly more of what you're doing is because of integrity rather than the applause, you're moving in the right direction. You're moving into a space where you will feel much fuller about who you are, not like full in the negative sense, but very proud and good about who you are and what you're becoming. And the third one here, this is the hardest of the three, I think, which is to find a moment to practice what I'll call quiet courage. One opportunity this week to speak up or to speak out, to do something without needing the feedback or the praise. Just do something for the sake of doing something, for that doing that thing is the right thing. It can be a no-risk act. Or if you want to take it down a notch, do something this week that nobody knows about. That's good. Whatever that is. It's getting up earlier, praying longer, working harder, helping someone out they don't even realize. Whatever it is, a no-risk, quiet moment of action, and on the high side, a quiet moment of courage. You'll find that over the course of time, and I find that over the course of time, A, I'm happier with myself, B, I'm a better version of myself, and C, I'm leaning into my intrinsic personal integrity and values. And that's where I want to be all the time. I'm not always there all the time, but that's where I want to be all the time. In closing out episode 250, to appreciate that not all leadership is loud, not all conviction is rewarded, and not all rightness comes with results. But every act done with integrity, without expectation, adds weight and heft to your character. To close it out with a quote from a new source we have not quoted in 249 prior episodes, a gentleman by the name of Ryan Holiday, who writes a lot on the subject of Stoicism. In his book called Ego is the Enemy, he writes, "Doing great work is enough. Recognition can't be the motive. It's a dangerous trap." That is Coaching the Bible for this week. I bless you and hope for you that you have a wonderful, glorious, and incredible weekend. Look forward to seeing you, of course, next week right back here on Coaching the Bible.